Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Breyault. I am the Vice President of Public Policy, Telecommunications, and Fraud with the National Consumers League. Today, I am honored to be joined by Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford for what I think will be a fantastic discussion about scams linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. General Ford, thank you so much for being part of today's discussion.
My pleasure to be here, John. Thank you for having me.
Great. Before we begin, I just want to tell you a little bit about NCL. We are America's oldest consumer advocacy organization. We've been around since 1899, and we run a campaign called fraud.org that's all about educating and empowering consumers to spot and avoid scams of all kinds. And that's why we're so pleased to have partners like you, General Ford, with us today. We really think that over the past 9 months, consumers have been victimized by frauds almost like never before. We've heard people talking about this as El Dorado for scammers. And certainly, I think in Nevada, just like across the country, we've seen a real uptick in complaints from consumers, and unfortunately, a lot of folks who have lost millions of dollars if you look at just what's been reported. And we think actually the true losses are far higher. But a quick bit about you. This is not about NCL. This is about the great work that you are doing in Nevada. General Ford is the 34th Attorney General of Nevada. He was elected in 2019 after a distinguished career in the Nevada State Senate, where he served in a variety of leadership roles, including Democratic Leader, Assistant Majority Whip, and Chair of the Senate Committee on Natural Resources. He has, it seems like if there is a degree that you could have obtained, you've done so, degrees from Texas A&M, from George Washington University in Washington, and then as my brother-in-law would be so happy to hear, law degree, an MA, and a PhD from the Ohio State University.
Right. Very good. I will stay on your podcast. I will stay on the screen then, since you got that right.
There you go. But despite all those accolades, I have to say what I think you'll be most well known for in the history books is being a viral sensation on Twitter. So if you haven't followed General Ford's Twitter feed, you can go on there today and check out his superb cane twirling skills representing the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. You should check that out, but not until the conclusion of our discussion today. So General Ford, again, thank you so much for making time for us for today's discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
So we'll get right into it. The FTC, as I said, has reported a dramatic spike in complaints regarding scammers using COVID-19, the stimulus bill, and other factors related to the pandemic as a way to defraud consumers. Can you talk about what you and your colleagues in the Attorney General's office are seeing in Nevada? Is it similar to what the FTC is seeing nationally? And what are you doing to protect Nevadans during this critical time?
Well, thank you again for having me. First off, let me say that. And then let me also offer you a little insight into the focus of my office. I have on the screen, well, in the audience here, two of my colleagues, Mark Kruger and Lucas Tucker, who are integral parts of my Bureau of Consumer Protection. On day 2 on the job, I laid out what I called my office's 3 C's, the areas of focus that we would have under my administration, in addition to everything else that we do. And they included criminal justice and criminal justice reform. They included the protection of civil and constitutional rights. And then the 3rd C, although I was the first C that I said then, was consumer protection. And their group was the only one that I called out by name because it would be a very busy group. And I'm so honored to be working with them because consumer protection was something that I ran on and something that we continue to operate under in terms of what our areas of focus are. So, but to your question, yeah, listen, Nevada's been impacted by many of the same scams that are being seen at the national level and by the FTC. It's horrifying to speak with sister states where certain scams matriculate with the knowledge that the scam will likely continue in Nevada. Scams and schemes aimed at stealing stimulus money was among the first wave of COVID-related scams that we began to see. Rental scams became another monster we had to address as people were being rented properties by people that were not even the landlords. And after paying a deposit in the first month's rent, they found themselves not having access to the property with no recourse. We also started to see employment scams on the increase, with scammers offering fake jobs or jobs that caused everyday Nevadans to unwittingly repackage stolen goods. In citing a need for social distancing, a contractor or other service providers might also ask you to review and sign a contract on their phone rather than a hard copy with ink signature. But signatures on mobile phones can be copied and pasted onto other documents. So you should always research a company online before you hire them and ask for printed copies of any agreements that you sign. That's another type of scam that we saw. Additionally, scammers have been texting or calling consumers pretending to be contact tracers. These imposters may be seeking the consumer's personal and financial information, such as social security numbers or bank account information. In the state of Nevada, Department of Health and Human Services, with technological partners, recently released our own smartphone app. It's called COVID Trace, to assist Nevadans with contact tracing. And that app is entirely opt-in, and it allowed users to anonymously report if they test positive for the virus and to find out if they had been exposed to someone who tests positive. And that app can be downloaded, small plug here, at nvhealthresponse.nv.gov/COVID trace. And so finally, I'll say my office has been protecting consumers from COVID-related scams through a two-pronged approach of education and enforcement. So we've been issuing press statements and releases and conducting virtual town halls throughout the last 7 months to educate consumers about the various types of scams that we've been seeing. And additionally, when necessary, we've intervened formally or sometimes informally to address scams at the local level, and we've referred others out to our local law enforcement partners as well.
Great. Well, I think for anybody who is just tuning in to my conversation today with General Ford, you've just gotten a small taste of the work that state attorneys generals do to protect consumers across the country. Really, we are a national organization, NCL, but the bulk of the consumer protection work that happens in Nevada and across the United States happens at the state and local level. So thank you for being on the front line of protecting Nevadans from these scams. I'd like to talk about one scam in particular. You talked about a whole slew of stimulus scams, rental scams, fake job scams, phony phone contracts. But there's one in particular we've been hearing a lot about, and I think it's very specific, not specific, but it's very relevant to Nevada. So in Nevada, since the COVID-19 pandemic began, it's a state that's very reliant, as you know, on travel and tourism, and it's been hit particularly hard by basically the collapse of those two industries since March. The unemployment rate in Nevada now stands at 13.7%, which is well above the national average of 7.9%. Your office really recently warned Nevadans about fraud stemming from people seeking to steal other folks' unemployment insurance benefits. And in fact, last week, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Nevada, along with your office, I believe, announced they were charging 10 defendants who had stolen $1.2 million in these types of scams. Can you talk about what your office is seeing with these unemployment insurance scams and what consumers in Nevada can do to reduce their risk of falling victim?
Absolutely. You talk about our number right now being at 13.7 or so percent unemployment. At one point, we were over 30% unemployed and saw this happening quite a bit. We're still above the national average, but we've come down quite a bit. But these fraudsters continue to act and operate. And sadly, many Nevadans may never know that false or fraudulent unemployment claims were filed in their name. The Nevada Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation, we call it DETR, has been working hard to detect and to refer these fraudulent claims to law enforcement. DETR is also working hard to ensure that victims of fraudulent claims are not further harmed if they find themselves in a situation having to file for unemployment themselves. DETR is also working hard with banks to stop fraudsters from accessing money on unemployment cards that was obtained through fraudulent claims, including those types of cards that a famous rapper who idiotically, frankly, rapped in a video about the DETR fraud that he was participating in California, was recently arrested here as well. Nevadans can help DETR in their task by reporting fraudulent claims that they become aware of, and they should report directly to DETR at their website. Nevada should also take steps, in my estimation, to protect their publicly identifiable information in the Nevada Attorney General's office offers several tips. First and foremost, you should never share financial or personal information, such as your full Social Security number, with someone you don't know. This information can be used to file fraudulent unemployment claims in your name, among other things. Now, I never shared mine, and it didn't stop someone from filing an unemployment claim in my name in a firm that I worked at 5 years ago. So it's happening, right? And it happens to us all. Not to mention the 50 or so employees in my own office here who've likewise suffered that. But when it happens to you, you should also consider freezing your credit with the three major credit bureaus. 6/2018 or so, federal law has allowed consumers to freeze their credit without paying a fee to do so. You have to contact each credit bureau, either online or over the phone, to do so. And if you need to thaw out your credit for any reason, you can do so quickly online, and you can do it on a temporary basis, also without a fee. Additionally, you should consider checking your credit report regularly to ensure that things are accurate and proper there. You're permitted one free credit report per credit bureau each year. And during the pandemic, all three credit bureaus are offering free weekly credit reports. So make sure you visit annualcreditreport.com. That's annualcreditreport.com, which is the official website where you can obtain the free reports. I'll also suggest that you use strong passwords. A strong password consists of a combination of letters, characters, and numbers that will be difficult for a hacker or a brute force attacker to figure out. And consider reducing your favorite phrase to an acronym and replace some of the letters with numbers and characters. A couple more suggestions. I would beware of public Wi-Fi. Connecting to a public network may give others access to your computer or to your phone. In addition, an unscrupulous individual might be spoofing a free network to trick you into connecting for the purpose of stealing your information. And finally, I'd say be careful what you share on the internet, including on social media sites. Scammers may be able to figure out answers to common security questions, such as your high school mascot or your mother's maiden name based on your profile. It's interesting because you see all of these games on certain social media sites that say, which of these have you ever done? And it lists 20 of them and it grades you. Well, they can use that type of information to guess at passwords as well. So be very cautious of those things.
Yeah, I tell this to folks on my Facebook friend group all the time. Thank you for sending me this link to, answer 20 questions to find out what band you're most like.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That is a perfect tool to build lists on the people that scammers can use.
Well, I know a band I'm like. I'm Earth, Wind, and Fire. So, and that ain't my password. Excuse me.
You know what? I respect that. So I'm glad you brought up this issue of sort of the steps that consumers can take to protect their data, because really that is a critical component of reducing your risk of fraud and scams, even if we weren't in a time like right now where so many people are vulnerable due to COVID. But it brings up an interesting concept about the role that consumers' use of technology and the technology industry can play in how we deal with this threat. So, I read recently, for example, that back in April, Google was blocking more than 240 million daily spam-related messages. That Microsoft now has made a specific threat intelligence feed about COVID-19 scams open to other companies that they can use for blocking some of these scams that we've been talking about. Can you talk about, from your point of view in the Attorney General's office, what is the role that tech companies should play, either partnering with your office or with other agencies in Nevada, or on their own, or in educating consumers to try and beat back some of these scams?
No, absolutely. Look, technology companies, and all companies for that matter, can play an important role in fighting fraud and scams by protecting personally identifiable information, by identifying potential scams, and by informing potential victims and collaborating with law enforcement to stop online frauds and scams. Robocalls are particularly vexing to me and Nevadans, and my office has been collaborating with the FTC, the FCC, private companies, and law enforcement to figure out ways to stop robocalls and the repugnant scams for good. I mean, I personally receive these robocalls all the time as well. I'll never forget a story, if you can indulge me real quickly. I got a phone call from the Social Security Administration asking me information, and I wouldn't give my Social Security number, and At the end of the day, I asked them, who they were, and they gave me their names. And finally, I pressed them so much they hung up the phone on me. So I called the number back and I asked them information about what they were calling me for. And the guy answered the phone. He says, my name is Robert Downey Jr. and my boss is Fred Astaire or something like that. He made up these names. Yeah. And I says, well, my name is Aaron Ford and I'm the Nevada Attorney General. And they said, yeah, right. And they hung up on me. Like I'm the one making up crazy names and stuff. Right. But it happens to everybody. And so that's one of the reasons why in June, I wrote a letter along with several of our sister states to the FCC to encourage continued collaboration between the state attorneys general and federal partners to address this particular harmful issue.
One thing I would like to point out too, and thank you for those comments, is that for folks who may be watching on our YouTube stream here, we are taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question for General Ford, type it in the chat there, and as we have time, we'll try and get to those. And so I would like to ask you one question that we got. We've had a couple of questions on the chat about these net spend cards. So in particular, one question from a reporter with Channel 13. She says a viewer that received a net spend card, if you're not familiar with these are the sort of the reloadable prepaid cards. The viewer received one with his name, and he's not sure if it's from DETR, which is, I guess, using Bank of America, or another federal assistance program. Is this a fraud? And what can he do to protect his information?
It very well may be. And that's one of the reasons why we have availability at our office to receive phone calls and complaints about this kind of stuff. If in doubt, don't participate and put a phone call into our office or email us. And we're happy to receive those types of complaints. ag.nv.gov is our general website, and there's a complaint link up there that you can file a complaint, as well as phone numbers that you can call to ask us about that. These scams, they crop up seemingly every day in dozens, if not hundreds a day. And so you never know what's going on. And for that reason, we want to make ourselves available to answer those questions on the specific instances.
Great. And for those who missed that web address is ag.nv.gov. And then also the phone number for General Ford's, the Bureau of Consumer Protection. The hotline number is 702-486-3132. Again, 702-486-3132. General Ford, I would like to talk about one particular community that we worry about being at risk, and that has to do with seniors. So during COVID, seniors are isolated. We're isolated from support networks, friends and family who are often there to spot the warning signs of fraud and scam and we know that seniors are particularly targeted by scammers because of this. For the seniors who may be watching today's broadcast, what are the resources that they can use in particular, and that their loved ones and caregivers can use to protect that vulnerable population from scams?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's a ever existing one. One of the very first town halls that I held after being elected, I believe it was I know when it was on Valentine's Day of February of 2019. It was a romance scam teletown hall that I held with AARP. This is not necessarily related to COVID, but absolutely pertinent to the question, in the sense that we know that seniors are a vulnerable population. Oftentimes these romance scams were targeting them particularly because they know seniors are sometimes seeking companionship, and they would send an email or get on Facebook and send a message saying, I'd like to come visit you. Can you send me money to do it? And they'd be taken advantage of. I never forget, my mother-in-law received a phone call from my son saying that he had been in a car accident and she needed to send money immediately or he was going to jail. Fortunately, my mother-in-law called my wife and got the true skinny on this, and she wasn't she wasn't scammed in that. So it happens all the time. And one of the important things we can do to help Nevada's seniors is to get them information and the knowledge to be wary of fraudsters and to not fall victim of scams in the first place. That's why on April 16th of this year, I hosted another teletown hall with AARP, this time to discuss scams and COVID-related frauds in particular, and to answer some of their questions. The town hall was very well attended. We had over 4,000 participants. And with such an active appetite for information, I hosted a second teletown hall on September 22nd, just last month, which had another 3,500 participants. So clearly, our seniors are knowledgeable about these issues, and they are hungry for information, and we want to be available to provide it to them. And so, the email address, the hotline number you gave, hopefully you'll share that again, and our website are two areas of support that they can also reach out to in circumstances like this.
Great, and we'll be discussing that issue of seniors and COVID scams in particular with Maria Moore on our panel following our discussion, who was with AARP Nevada. But again, that website to file a complaint with the Attorney General's office is ag.nv.gov, and the Consumer Protection Hotline number is 702-486-3132. General Ford, this is an incredibly busy time of year for all of us, and I know for you and the other folks in the state government there in Nevada. I just wanted to say on behalf of myself, of our executive director, Sally Greenberg, the National Consumers League, and consumers across Nevada and across America, thank you for the work that you do. You are a true consumer protection champion. And we couldn't do what we do without great partners like you. So thank you so much for making time to talk to us today. We really, really appreciate it.
John, it's been a great conversation, and thank you. I look forward to the next one.
Great. And go Buckeyes.
Yeah, right on.
All right.
Bye-bye.
So now we're going to transition out from our conversation with General Ford, and we will bring in our esteemed panel of experts to continue the conversation. So give us 1 minute while we make that switch. Hello, Maria. Hello, Senator Harris. How are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you, John?
I'm great. I'm great. We're just going to give it 1 more minute while we wait for Assemblyman Flores to join us.
Is my volume okay?
I can hear you fine, Maria. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Excellent.
Mr. Flores is having some trouble. You can proceed, John.
Okay. Well, we want to be respectful of your time, and we will bring in Assemblyman Flores as soon as he joins us. But we'll go ahead and get started now. Again, my name is John Breyault from the National Consumers League. I run our fraud.org consumer education campaign, and we are thrilled today to welcome our esteemed panel for the second part of our event on COVID-19 scams and how to protect consumers in Nevada. I am joined by Nevada Senator Dallas Harris, as well as AARP Nevada State Director Maria Moore. In a moment, I will also be joined by Nevada Assemblyman Edgar Flores. Thank you all for making time for today's event.
Thank you for having us.
Great.
That could be here, John.
Well, I won't, we don't have enough time to go through everyone's bios, but I will take a moment to introduce the three of you. First, Nevada Senator Dallas Harris, a proud Nevadan, is a good friend of mine, and she knows how to put public in public service. If you look at her resume, she has done work as a lawyer and advocate with Public Citizen, Public Knowledge, and the Nevada Public Utilities Commission, as well as the FTC, Facebook, the DC City Council. She has been in the Nevada State Senate since 2018. In addition to that, she's also a consumer rights attorney with the Legal Aid Center of Nevada. Next, we have Assemblyman Flores. Assemblyman Flores, welcome. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank you for having us.
Oh, great. Thank you for joining us. Nevada Assemblyman Edgar Flores assumed office in November 2014. In the Assembly, he serves in several leadership roles, including chairing the Government Affairs and Education Committees and leading the Hispanic Legislative Caucus. I was especially pleased to see that you've been a leader in the fight against notario fraud in Nevada, even before your time in the Assembly. That's one that we hear about a lot at fraud.org, so thank you for your work on that. In addition to his role in the Assembly, Assemblyman Flores is also an attorney in private practice at Gonzalez and Flores Law. Edgar, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, we have Maria Moore. She is the AARP Nevada State Director. Maria is a leader in protecting the seniors community in Nevada. You just heard General Ford talking about the importance of protecting seniors in the state. And I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about what you are seeing on the ground there. She has also been, as was mentioned, a strong partner with AARP has been a strong partner with NCL over the years. And the teletown hall that General Ford talked about, as he mentioned, recently brought in, what did he say, 3,500 participants to talk about COVID-19 scams?
Yes, indeed.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for your work to all of you. Let's jump right into our conversation today about COVID-19 scams. So the three of you just heard what General Ford had to say about the state of COVID-19 scams and frauds in Nevada and what his office is doing about it. What jumped out at you about what he had to say? I'll open this up to the floor to any of the three of you.
Well, I'll just start by saying Attorney General Ford is a great example of why elections matter. I can guarantee you not every attorney general in the country is as focused on these issues as Attorney General Ford is. And so, you know, one of the things that stood out to me, and it's really always stood out to me about him, I have to brag a little bit. He's my predecessor. I was fortunate enough to be appointed to take his seat when he became Attorney General. And frankly, I think he's doing a great job. So, I mean, his just personal kind of commitment to helping Nevadans really shines through.
Great.
I want to say that I want to piggyback on some of the things that General Ford said about the use of technology in this day where we're not going in to seeing people face to face to sign things. And so some of the legitimacy of the calls, the texts are some of the things that really jumped out for our ARP members and population that we deal with. How do they really know that this is who the person is? And then secondly, that the scams that were pre-COVID are still here today. So just because it was a social security scam that we were hearing 3-4 years ago, they're still rampant today during this COVID time.
And the only thing I'll add is it's just frustrating to see that it's the same scam evolving in different ways. It keeps coming back in different forms via text, phone call, social media. That's probably what's most frustrating to me. Before we only had to worry about our parents answering the phone. Now we got to worry about what they're looking at on their screen, what they're receiving via email. And that to me is probably the biggest challenge we have to face as a state.
Definitely. I mean, this is, we see this all the time where, you know, we every year at fraud.org, we do a top 10 scams report. And one of the things we look at is how consumers are first being contacted by scammers. When I started doing this work 12 years ago, you know, phone and email were the top ways that consumers were seeing these scams. Now we're seeing social media, we're seeing text messages, Instagram and Twitter feeds are becoming big vectors for frauds and scams. So I totally hear you, Edgar, on sort of the, we call them attack surfaces in the anti-fraud space, but definitely those are huge concerns. Dallas, one thing I wanted to sort of expand a little bit about is, you know, at your work at the Legal Aid Center, you help with the adult guardianship project there. And I'm wondering if anything that Senator Ford or from your own experience jumps out about the need for older adults, particularly those who may be in need of a guardian, for example, or otherwise at risk. What are some of the specific vulnerabilities that those adults and the people who care for them need to be on the lookout for when it comes to scams?
Sure. You know, thank you for that great question. I'll just start off by generally saying the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada has been laser focused on COVID-19 response and delivering great legal service to that vulnerable population in these times. They have a COVID-19 toolkit, both in English and Spanish, with resources up and down the list of categories: housing, financial, rental assistance, landlord-tenant issues, any and everything that you can think of. Legal aid has been thinking about and getting covered for their constituency. As you mentioned, I deal with older adults who are vulnerable in and of themselves. And in the past, in Nevada, we've seen some abuses of those particular groups of folks. And so that's why the adult guardianship unit at Legal Aid exists. Unfortunately, not every adult in Nevada, not every senior citizen has an attorney, but every adult who has a guardian in Nevada does have a personal attorney from Legal Aid. And so I would say that particular population, because of some of the things we've done here in the Nevada legislature, is actually a little bit more covered right now. It's our job to look over every penny that the guardian is spending annually to make sure that the rights of these people are protected. But, you know, I'd say that the issues are the same for all seniors. You want to make sure that they aren't kind of speaking to people they don't know and giving over vulnerable information. With adults that I work with, they're often slightly incapacitated, if not completely. And so they have dementia, may not remember that they already spoke to you, or may be susceptible to being convinced that there's someone, you're someone that they can trust. And so it's really important that we're all doubling down on our jobs on that end at this time.
Great. I think that's so important that we think about not just what sort of tech savvy folks like maybe you and the four of us might be able to do to protect ourselves, but I really do think it's important that we drill down on how to protect the most vulnerable from these kinds of scams. Edgar, I want to talk a little bit about sort of particularly the vulnerability of Hispanic and Latinx consumers in Nevada to COVID-19 scams. So I know that you helped launch a COVID-19 task force in your role with the Hispanic Legislative Caucus. And I was thinking about that in the context of a couple things that we're seeing in our complaints. Number one, there's all kinds of fake COVID-19 treatments and cures and vaccines that are floating around on the internet. And so people who may already have difficulty obtaining health services from traditional means, I think we worry a lot about their resistance to sort of these scams. I mean, and that's what they are. And they can, at best, they're going to cost you money for something that doesn't work. At worst, they can be dangerous or deadly if you take something that, or forget, take that instead of seeking out treatment. And then I think the other thing was specifically around stimulus scams. So we know that undocumented consumers were excluded from stimulus checks under the CARES Act. And so, that's been a lifeline for so many consumers. And without that, I think there's definitely more vulnerability to these sort of get-rich-quick schemes. Can you tell me, from your point of view, what are your constituents telling you about these kinds of scams, and what can they do to protect themselves?
Sure. Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. Unfortunately, one of the things that happens is when we're in any type of crisis, I always say the general population gets a mild cold, but the Latino community sometimes gets the flu. And the reason is it takes a long time for the information to trickle down into the Latino community. And one of the reasons is language barriers. While the governor, a state agency, or federal entity may be putting information out there, it's typically only in English. So it's up to private industry and the nonprofit world to come into that space and start translating it. And sometimes by the time it's translated, it's already morphed and evolved into something else. That's part of the reason why the Nevada Hispanic Legislative Caucus created these subgroups, specifically because we realized that we were going to need to tackle these issues individually. So I can give you an example of other issues that I've seen. We were talking about undocumented communities. One of the things that is always of concern is if you're undocumented, you're not eligible to apply for federal type of services. And what that means is you often find yourself fearful of even going to a food pantry, for example, because you're concerned that if you go and get food from a food pantry, that might be from a private entity or a nonprofit, that it may be from, there's federal dollars there, right? And one of the things that happens is some of these families will get calls and they'll be warned, listen, if you don't pay this penalty, you're not going to be eligible in the future to become a resident or a citizen. And these families panic and they'll do it. And then they're too afraid to report the crime. Another thing is with loans. So sometimes they'll say, look, there's this nonprofit out there. I know you're not eligible for the stimulus package. You're not eligible for this, but we have this very special program designed just for you. And don't get me wrong, there are great programs out there of people stepping into this space and trying to help them. But unfortunately, they end up giving out their personally identifiable information. And then all of a sudden they just got scammed. No money ever comes in. The only other last thing that I would say that we're seeing and that is very frustrating is specifically with the healthcare world. We know that a lot of these communities, unfortunately, don't have access to quality healthcare. And as a consequence to that, they have to go to a third party slash what we call these natural herbs, natural remedies. That's the same exact reason why we have such large fraud with notarials, that they don't go to attorneys, right? There's this sense of like, I can't afford an attorney. And so you have folk that fill that middle gap. And unfortunately, there's a lot of fraud in there. And we see that all the time. Sometimes they're getting sugar pills. Sometimes they're getting something as frustrating as a tea. And they're paying this ridiculous amount of money, but you'll do it because you're like, look, I can't afford to go to a doctor, but we'll buy these teas that do nothing. And they're falling for that. And it's just such a frustrating reality that some of these families are facing. But it goes to show just how much of a problem in the Latino community this is.
Yeah, and I think the statistics certainly bear that out. I mean, I think you only need to look at the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Latino communities in both hospitalizations and deaths to see the real world impact of the kind of things that you've just been talking about. So I'm so glad that you're raising these issues and helping your constituents and folks across the state get access to some of these resources that they can trust. So Maria, I want to turn to you. General Ford talked about the amazing turnout for your teletown halls recently to talk about COVID-19 scams. At those town halls, what were you hearing from seniors in Nevada about the kinds of scams that they are getting calls and emails about? And what kind of advice would you at AARP give to them? I know you have amazing resources on the web and through your state chapters that consumers can use. What's out there for seniors in Nevada to avoid these scams?
Thank you so much. First of all, when COVID took hold, or long before COVID even took hold, we stood up a resource on our AARP.org website, and we have resources specific to Nevada at AARP.org/NV. But we also partner with General Ford. We also partnered with other entities to bring really great information and resources to our members and to the community. So I want to start from the advice part, because what we found out is that people are socially isolated. And by getting more isolated, they're joining Facebook, they're joining networks. And if you recall what General Ford said, is people are, tell me which color am I, or those games that we see. We put ourselves at risk when we start clicking on those links. And so how can we still be together while maintaining that safety and not clicking into links, ensuring that if you get a call or if you get an email, that it is a legitimate entity? And so learning to say no, hanging up, knowing that you're in power is really valuable, so that you can say, I'll call my bank, I'll check with Social Security, I will go to the website where I know my retirement is. All those things are very, very important. And then again, the utility. We find that people on fixed incomes, such as what Assemblyman Flores was saying, people are vulnerable. It's almost like the most vulnerable get attacked the hardest. The little that they have. So now they're worried about getting evicted, getting their lights shut off, when that may not be true at all. And so we know that the reason we're getting the continuous high volume of people coming to our calls is that they want to be reassured that the message we're giving out there is in fact the message that's truth. And so we also have a place on our website called arp.org/fact tracker, because again, people want to be reassured that somebody's not going to come and evict them, that their social security is good, that their utility bill is going to not, their utilities are not going to be cut off. And that link that they inadvertently clicked is not going into the dark web. A lot of these terminologies are new to them. And so we, with my parents are 88 years old. You know, I've put the fear of God in my parents. Don't click anything, don't sign anything. But the minute you slip up, you know, they are friendly people. They're hungry for contact, and suddenly they have somebody on the phone and they've done something very, and I don't call it stupid, but something that they walked in that it's through no fault of their own, because these cameras are very, very good.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point to emphasize, and something that we fight against every day. It's this stigma of fraud, and I think it's particularly, Edgar, you talked about it, Maria, you've talked about it. When people fall victims to fraud, for a variety of reasons, they often seem hesitant to seek out support, whether it's support from the government, support from their family and friend networks. There's often shame involved that they would fall victim. And I think what the message I hope folks take away from today's discussion is that if you've been a victim of fraud, or someone you know and love has been a victim of fraud, they're not stupid. They're not greedy. The scammers are professional, organized criminals who are out there to take every last cent, regardless of whether you have $1 million in the bank account or you've got $5 in the bank account. There's scammers out there who are organized and trying to take that away from you. I did want to sort of ask one question that we got. This is a question for the entire panel today. A reporter from USA Today asked if we're seeing fraud or complaints related to fintech. So I know, you know, there are all these apps out there: Cash App, Zelle, PayPal, Venmo, that are sort of new ways to pay that consumers are increasingly adopting. But at the same time, we do see fraud associated with the use of that technology. So what are you all seeing, either from your personal experience or from what you've heard from folks in your organization or constituents, about concerns around fraud and fintech?
So if I can, I want to quickly endorse the concept that John just brought up about, you know, being ashamed to tell your story. There's power in telling your story. You can let someone else know in the future that something isn't legit. There are reporting mechanisms on the internet. The Federal Trade Commission has a reporting mechanism. And the more people who report the same actions, the more likely it is those scammers will be caught. So if you are a victim, please step forward. As far as fintech and scams in that nature, I don't know if I've heard anything particularly related to some of these new applications. However, I do know that some of the unemployment benefit scams, the pandemic unemployment assistance scams have been using technology, right? Whether it be getting on the internet and filing a claim in someone's name, or accessing a bank account that has unemployment benefits in it that does not belong to you. And so those are some tech savvy ways people are scamming nowadays. But as far as Venmo necessarily, or Zelle, those platforms, as far as I've heard, have been fairly secure.
In our population tends to be much more less users of all these PayPals and Zelle and all these things. However, what we do hear is that because people are ordering more online, that their accounts are being either hacked, or somebody's done funny stuff and now they're getting a big bill, or they're getting stuff like from Amazon that they didn't order because somebody's fishing to see if it's a good account. And so they're having to monitor all those cards much more carefully.
And Edgar, anything you wanted to add about fintech?
Sure, and I don't know if it falls directly in line, but the only three things that I can think of, just folk that I've had an opportunity to speak to recently, and I guess it falls in line a little bit, is folk who will purchase an item and then they're dissatisfied, and the company knows that they're going to be dissatisfied, and then they're given back kind of like a currency credit that they can only use in 2 or 3 different websites, which is very frustrating to them, right? As opposed to what you're accustomed to, which is you getting your money back. They'll say, no, you have to use it here. And the other concern, and this was with some small businesses, and I know, I think AG, I don't recall if you touched upon it, where with small businesses, a vendor will come in and say, look, how much are you paying per credit card transaction? They'll say, we'll do it much cheaper. But what they don't say is that they'll do it much cheaper for about a month, and then it goes up 3-4 times, and then they're stuck on that. And then there's a huge commitment for several years. Those are the only things that I think kind of fall in line with this conversation, but I haven't heard too much more beyond that.
I haven't either.
Well,
And John, if I can, I just want to bring up one thing I think people should be on the lookout for, and those are, those kind of phishing, maybe on the GoFundMe page, putting up, seeking finances or help when the situations aren't exactly genuine. A good example of that was the quick Twitter hack. I think they asked for Bitcoin.
Right.
Right. But, be on the lookout for sympathy stories and people trying to collect your money that way.
Definitely. All of that is fantastic advice. And I think one thing I just wanted to add to what Edgar says, we're talking about consumers here today, but they aren't the only ones that are vulnerable to COVID-19 scams. Small business owners are hurting right now. Millions are going under, and all of them are looking for ways to cut costs. So the kinds of scams you talked about, Edgar, I think small business owners need to be very much aware of. And fortunately, there are lots of resources out there from the FTC, the Small Business Administration, and other places to help small business owners avoid scams during these difficult times. I see we're at time here. So I wanted to take just a moment to thank the 3 of you. Thank you not only for making time to be with us today and to talk about this important issue, but thank you for what you're doing every single day to protect consumers in Nevada from scams during COVID-19. And unfortunately, even after we're past this COVID moment, the frauds and scams we've been talking about today are going to continue to affect far too many. So you all are really out there on the front lines, doing the hard work to protect consumers. So on behalf of myself and the National Consumers League and consumers across Nevada, thank you so much for what you do and for being a part of today's panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for those of you who are watching, if you want to share this video, it'll be available after today. Please share it widely on Twitter, Facebook, on YouTube. The more people that watch this, the more our message gets out and the more consumers that can be protected. So thank you again and have a great afternoon.